Commander Tae-Wan stood at the observation window of Station Omega-7, watching the human transport ships dock with the station. His crystalline skin reflected the cold blue light of the stars beyond. He had served the Velkari military for 30 cycles, and in all that time, he had never felt such doubt about an assignment. The humans were new to the Galactic Coalition. They had joined only 2 years ago, after proving they had developed faster-than-light travel on their own. Most of the elder races saw this as impressive, but Tae-Wan knew better. Technology alone did not make a species worthy of respect. The Velkari had been spacefaring for thousands of years. They had perfected warfare through logic and strategy. These humans were children playing with weapons they barely understood. "Commander, the human delegation has arrived," his tactical officer Velthara announced. Her voice was calm and measured, as all Velkari voices were. Emotion was weakness. Logic was strength. This was the way. Tae-Wan turned from the window and walked to the conference room. His movements were smooth and efficient. The Velkari stood, nearly 7 feet tall, with bodies designed for both strength and endurance. Their skin, hard as crystal, could withstand impacts that would kill most species. They were, by all measures, superior to humans in every physical way. The conference room doors opened, and Tae-Wan got his first look at Captain Ji-Hai. She was small, barely reaching 6 feet. Her skin was soft and vulnerable, her body structure weak by Velkari standards. She wore the dark blue uniform of Earth's United Defense Force, and her black hair was tied back in a practical style. But what struck Tae-Wan most were her eyes. They were sharp and alert, studying him with the same intensity he was studying her. "Commander Tae-Wan," Ji-Hai said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. "It's an honor to work with the Velkari." Tae-Wan looked at her hand for a moment before taking it. The human custom of physical contact seemed unnecessary to him, but he had been briefed on their protocols. Her grip was firm, stronger than he expected from such a small creature. "Captain Ji-Hai," he replied, "I trust your journey was without incident." "Smooth as silk," she said, releasing his hand. Behind her stood a younger human male, Lieutenant Hyunwoo, who nodded respectfully to Tae-Wan. They sat at the conference table, and Tae-Wan activated the holographic display. Images of the Rothak, Dominion's military forces, appeared in the air between them. The Rothak were a brutal species, known for their aggressive expansion and ruthless tactics. They had been attacking coalition colonies on the outer rim for months. "The situation is grave," Tae-Wan began. "The Rothak have superior numbers in this sector. Intelligence suggests they are planning a major offensive. The coalition has decided to form mixed-species battalions to counter this threat. You and I will command one such force." Ji-Hai studied the holographic displays carefully. "What's our force composition?" 200 Velkari soldiers and 300 human marines, Tae-Wan replied. "We will also have 50 support personnel from various coalition species. 550 total," Ji-Hai said, nodding. "Against how many Rothak?" Conservative estimates place their forces at 15,000 in this sector. Hyunwoo whistled softly. "Those are rough odds." Tae-Wan looked at the young human with disapproval. "Emotional reactions serve no purpose, Lieutenant. We will analyze the situation logically and develop an optimal strategy." "With respect, Commander," Ji-Hai said, her voice level but firm. "Emotion and logic aren't opposites. My people have learned that the hard way." Tae-Wan felt a flicker of irritation which he immediately suppressed. "The Velkari have studied warfare for millennia. Our methods have proven successful in countless conflicts. I expect your forces to follow established tactical doctrine." "We'll follow sound tactics," Ji-Hai replied. "But my Marines fight their own way. That's non-negotiable." The two commanders stared at each other across the table. Tae-Wan had read the reports about human stubbornness, but experiencing it firsthand was different. These creatures had been in space for less than a century, yet they spoke as if they were equals. "Very well," Tae-Wan said finally. "We will discuss specific tactical approaches as situations arise. For now, I suggest you get your troops settled. We depart for the contested zone in 3 days." Ji-Hai stood, and Hyunwoo followed. Thank you, Commander. I look forward to working with you. After they left, Velthara approached Taiwan. The humans seem confident. Arrogant, Taiwan corrected. They have no understanding of true warfare. They have never faced an enemy like the Rothak. Perhaps, Velthara said. But the Coalition specifically requested human forces for this mission. There must be a reason. Taiwan had wondered about that himself. The official explanation was that humans had proven themselves in several small engagements, showing tactical flexibility and high morale. But the Velkari possessed these qualities as well, along with superior physical capabilities. Why specifically request humans? Over the next 3 days, Taiwan observed the human Marines as they prepared for deployment. They were loud, often laughing and joking even while performing serious tasks. They touched each other frequently, pats on the back, handshakes, even embraces. It all seemed so inefficient and emotional. But he also noticed other things. The Yao, humans trained constantly, pushing their bodies to limits that seemed painful. They moved with a coordination that suggested extensive practice. And when they practiced combat drills, there was something in their movements that Taiwan couldn't quite identify. It was almost like hunger. On the evening before departure, Taiwan found Jihai in the station's observation lounge. She stood alone looking out at the stars, holding a cup of some hot human beverage. "Captain," he said, approaching. "I wanted to discuss our tactical coordination one final time." Jihai turned to him, and in the dim light her face looked tired. "Of course, Commander, but can I ask you something first?" Taiwan nodded. "Have you ever fought alongside humans before?" "No. This will be my first experience." Jihai took a sip of her drink. "Then you're in for a surprise. We're not like other species. We don't calculate odds the way you do. We don't approach war as a logic puzzle to solve." "Then how do you approach it?" Taiwan asked, genuinely curious despite himself. "As something that has to be won, no matter the cost," Jihai replied. She looked back out at the stars. "My great-grandfather fought in the last World War on Earth. Do you know what he told me before he died? He said that humans are the only species that went to the moon not because it was easy, but because it was hard. We don't do things because they make sense. We do them because they need to be done." Taiwan considered this. "That sounds illogical." "It is," Jihai agreed, "but we've survived this long because of it, not in spite of it." The next morning, the Joint Task Force departed Station Omega-7, 550 soldiers from 2 very different species, heading toward a war zone where they were outnumbered nearly 30-1. Taiwan reviewed the tactical data one more time, calculating survival probabilities and optimal engagement strategies, but his mind kept returning to Jihai's words. He looked at the human Marines preparing their equipment in the transport bay. They didn't look like superior warriors. They looked soft and vulnerable and emotional. Yet something in their eyes reminded him of predators he had seen on other worlds. Something old and dangerous lurked beneath their friendly surfaces. Taiwan didn't know it yet, but he was about to learn why the galaxy was beginning to fear humanity. Not because of their technology or their ships, but because of something far more primal, something that the Velkari in all their logical perfection had forgotten long ago. The transport jumped to faster than light speed, and the war began. The mining colony on Korvax 9 was burning when they arrived. Taiwan watched the surface from the command ship, seeing smoke rising from 3 major settlements. The Rothak had attacked 6 hours earlier, and the small garrison of Coalition defenders was barely holding on. "All units, prepare for combat deployment," Taiwan announced through the communication system. His voice remained calm despite the chaos visible on the planet below. "Velkari forces will take the northern defensive line. Human Marines will secure the southern mining facilities. We engage in 15 minutes. Beside him, Jihai was already strapping on her combat armor. Human armor was lighter than Velkari battlesuits, and to Taiwan's eyes it looked fragile. But Jihai moved in it with practiced ease. "Commander, my Marines are ready," she said. "We'll hold the south." "The southern zone has the heaviest Rothak presence," Taiwan warned. "Logic suggests we should reverse the positions. Valkyrie forces are better suited for "We'll hold the south," Ji-hai repeated, cutting him off. Trust me. Taewon wanted to argue, but there was no time. The dropships were launching. He watched Ji-hai run to join her troops, and for the first time, he felt uncertain about his command decisions. He was allowing emotion to override logic by accepting her plan. This was not the Velkari way. The landing was rough. Rothak anti-aircraft fire rocked the dropships as they descended through the atmosphere. Taewon's ship touched down in the northern zone, and he immediately began deploying his Velkari soldiers into defensive positions. Everything went according to protocol. His troops moved with precision and efficiency. Then the radio chatter from the southern zone started coming through. Contact. Multiple Rothak war beasts moving on our position. Third squad, fall back to secondary line. We need support on the east flank. The human voices were loud and urgent, so different from the calm reports of his Velkari troops. Taewon monitored the tactical display, watching the southern positions light up with combat indicators. The humans were being hit hard. Captain Ji-hai, do you require Velkari reinforcement? Taewon asked through the command channel. Negative, Commander. Ji-hai's voice came back, slightly breathless. We're holding. Keep your position secure. Taewon wanted to override her decision, but before he could respond, a new alert appeared on his display. Rothak forces were pushing toward the northern line now. He had his own battle to fight. The Rothak came in waves. They were large creatures, heavily armored with thick hides and powerful weapons. But the Velkari were ready. Taewon's soldiers maintained their positions, firing with calculated precision. Each shot was measured. Each movement was efficient. They fought like the perfect soldiers they were trained to be. But as the battle continued, Taewon kept one eye on the southern zone display. The humans should have been overrun by now. The tactical computer showed they were outnumbered 3-1. Yet somehow they were still fighting. Then he heard something that made his crystalline skin vibrate with confusion. Through the radio static came sounds from the human position, sounds that shouldn't exist on a battlefield. The humans were shouting, not orders or tactical reports, but something else. War cries, screams of rage and defiance. Velthara, redirect one of our drones to the southern zone, Taewon ordered. I want to see what's happening there. The drone's feed appeared on his display, and what Taewon saw didn't make sense. The humans weren't fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like wild animals. A young human soldier, Private Daun, according to her ID tag, was charging directly at a Rothak war beast. The creature stood twice her height with claws that could tear through steel. She should have fallen back. She should have called for support. Instead, Daun ran straight at it. She fired her plasma rifle at point-blank range, then dove under the beast's counterattack. Before it could turn, she had attached explosive charges to its underbelly. The beast roared and tried to shake her off, but Daun held on, her face showing not fear but fierce determination. Daun, get clear, someone shouted over the radio, but she didn't get clear. The beast was headed toward a defensive barrier, where a dozen human marines were pinned down. If it reached them, they would all die. Daeun knew this. Taewon could see in her eyes that she knew. She detonated the charges while still holding on to the beast. The explosion was massive. When the smoke cleared, both Daun and the war beast were gone. But the defensive barrier held and the 12 Marines were still alive. Taewon stared at the screen, his logical mind trying to process what he had just witnessed. No Velkari soldier would ever make such a choice. To sacrifice oneself was to remove a valuable asset from the battlefield. It was illogical. It was wasteful, but it had worked. All units, Rothak, are falling back, Velthara reported. We have successfully defended the northern zone with 0 casualties. Southern zone status? Taewon asked, though he already knew. The display showed the humans had held their ground. Human Marines report successful defense, Velthara said. She paused, and Taewon heard something unusual in her voice. Was that surprise? They suffered 47 casualties but inflicted over 300 Rothak losses. The ratio is unprecedented. After the battle, Taewon walked through the southern defensive zone. The ground was scorched and torn. Human medics worked quickly, tending to wounded Marines. The soldiers who weren't injured sat in small groups, some of them still shaking from adrenaline. He found Jihi near the command post, reviewing combat reports. Her armor was damaged in several places, and there was a cut above her left eye that someone had hastily bandaged. Captain, I witnessed Private Daeun's actions, Taewon said. Why did she do that? Ji-hai looked up at him and her eyes were red. Whether from smoke or tears, Taewon couldn't tell, because her squad needed her to, but she died. She removed herself from future operations. It was tactically unsound. It saved 12 lives, Ji-hai replied, her voice hard. That's all the tactical sense it needed. Taewon struggled to find words. My species does not understand this. We preserve our soldiers for the greater strategic picture, and that's why you'll never fight the way we do, Ji-hai said. She stood facing him directly. You asked me on the station how humans approach war. I'll tell you now. We protect what matters to us. We protect each other. Logic doesn't win wars when you have nothing left worth calculating for. A human corporal, Minji, approached with a report. Captain, we've secured all the mining facilities. Also, there's something weird in the Rothak communications we intercepted. Weird how? Ji-hai asked. They're calling for backup, but the language they use, it's like they're scared. Really scared. Of us. Taewon took the communications pad and read the translated text. Minji was right. The Rothak messages contained words like demon soldiers and death-refusing warriors. They were requesting additional forces specifically to counter human positions, even though the humans were supposedly the weaker force. Why would the Rothak fear humans? That night Taewon couldn't rest. He walked through the temporary base they had established, and he found himself near the human section. The Marines had set up a memorial, a simple arrangement of helmets and rifles for their fallen comrades. Daeun's helmet sat at the center. Sergeant Jae-sung stood before the memorial, his head bowed. Taewon approached quietly. Your people honor their dead, Taewon observed. Jae-sung nodded without looking at him. We never forget them. Every name, every face. They're the reason we keep fighting. But she made an illogical choice. No, Commander, Jae-sung said, finally turning to face him. She made the only choice. That's what you don't understand yet. When you fight beside humans, you'll never fight alone. We'll die for each other before we'll let each other fall. Taewon looked at the memorial again. In the Velkari military, fallen soldiers were recorded in databases and remembered at formal ceremonies. But this felt different. More personal. More raw. The Rothak messages say they fear you, Taewon said. Why would they fear such a young species? Jae-sung smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. Maybe they see something in us that reminds them of death. Maybe we fight like we've got nothing to lose. Maybe they've never faced an enemy that refuses to quit. He walked away, leaving Taewon alone with his thoughts. The commander stood there for a long time, watching the stars rise over the scarred battlefield. Somewhere out there, the Rothak were regrouping, planning their next attack. And here, the humans were mourning their dead while simultaneously preparing to do it all over again. For the first time in his military career, Taewon wondered if logic alone was enough to win a war. The forward operating base was quiet 3 days after the Battle of Korvax 9. Taewon walked through the compound at night, unable to find the rest that his body needed. The Velkari required less sleep than humans, but even he needed some. Yet his mind would not stop working, processing everything he had seen. He found himself drawn to the human section of the base. Most of the Marines were gathered around a fire they had built in a metal drum. It was against regulations, but Taewon found himself not caring. The humans sat on supply crates, passing around bottles of some kind of alcohol, talking and laughing. One of them noticed him approaching. It was Lieutenant Hyun-woo, Ji-hee's second-in-command. Commander Taewon, come join us. The other humans looked up, and for a moment Taewon considered refusing. But something made him accept the invitation. He sat on a crate at the edge of their circle. We were just telling stories about home, Hyun-woo explained, handing Taewon a bottle. Want a drink? Velkari do not consume alcohol, Taewon said. It impairs logical thinking. Several of the humans laughed, not unkindly. That's kind of the point, Corporal Minji said. Sometimes you need to stop thinking so much. They returned to their stories. They talked about places on Earth, mountains and oceans and cities Taewon had never seen. They talked about families waiting for them. They laughed about foolish things they had done when they were younger. It was all so casual, so emotional, so human. Commander, Hyun-woo said after a while. Can I ask you something? What do you think of us? The humans, I mean. You've fought beside us now. Do you still think we're weak? Taewon considered the question carefully. I do not think you are weak, but I do not understand you. Private Daeun's sacrifice. No Velkari would have made that choice. That's because you guys are smarter than us, Hyunwoo said, but his tone wasn't bitter. You calculate everything. Risks, rewards, probabilities. It's actually pretty impressive. Then why don't humans do the same? Hyunwoo took a long drink from his bottle before answering. Because some things can't be calculated. Some things you just have to feel. He looked into the fire. Commander, do you know much about Earth history? Very little. Only what was in the Coalition briefing files. Then let me tell you a story, Hyunwoo said. It's not a happy story, but it's important. He glanced at the other Marines, and they nodded. They had heard this before. Humans have been fighting each other since before we could write, Hyunwoo began. We've had thousands of wars. We've built weapons specifically to kill other humans as efficiently as possible. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear bombs. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on cities full of civilians during World War II. Do you understand what I'm telling you? We did that to our own species. Taewon felt a chill run through him. That is horrifying. Yeah, Hyunwoo agreed. It really is. The Velkari had one war in your ancient past, right? Then you figured out that logic was better than fighting, and you stopped. But humans? We just kept going. We've refined every possible way to kill each other. We know exactly how to cause maximum damage, maximum fear, maximum pain. Why are you telling me this? Taewon asked. Because that's why we're good at this, Hyunwoo said, gesturing around at the military base. We don't just know war as a concept. We live it. We breathe it. We carry it in our bones. Every human alive is descended from people who survived thousands of years of constant conflict. We're the species that turned warfare into an art form, then a science, then a nightmare, and we did it all to ourselves. Sergeant Jae-sung spoke up from across the fire. My grandmother survived a war that killed 60 million people. 60 million. That's not a number you can calculate around. That's not something you can be logical about. That's horror on a scale that changes how a species thinks. Taewon sat in silence trying to process this information. The coalition briefings had mentioned that Earth had a violent history, but they had not conveyed the scale of it. The idea of a species in near constant war with itself was beyond his comprehension. So when you see us fight the way we do, Hyunwoo continued, when you see us making choices that seem crazy or illogical, understand that we're using lessons learned from fighting ourselves. We know every dirty trick. We know how to break an enemy's spirit. We know how to keep fighting when we should be dead, because we've done all of it before, to each other. That is why the Rothak fear you, Taewon said quietly, understanding finally clicking into place. They sense that you are dangerous in a way they do not understand. Maybe, Hyunwoo said. Or maybe they're just smart enough to know that when you back a human into a corner, they don't give up. They get mean. The conversation was interrupted by an alarm. Everyone immediately stood, and Taewon's command tablet lit up with a priority message. The Coalition Intelligence Division had finished analyzing the intercepted Rothak communications. 20 minutes later, Taewon and Ji-hai stood in the intelligence center, reading the translated documents with growing surprise. The Rothak had established specific protocols for engaging human forces. The documents were detailed and very specific. They recommend avoiding close-quarters combat with humans, Ji-hai read aloud. They suggest using long-range weapons and overwhelming force. They warn against pursuing wounded human soldiers because, she paused, reading ahead, because wounded humans often continue fighting with injuries that should be fatal. Taewon scrolled through more documents. They call you death chanters and void-born demons. They have reports of human squads fighting to the last soldier rather than surrendering. They describe your tactics as insane but effective. There's a whole section here about human psychological warfare, Velthera added, pulling up another file. The Rothak leadership is warning their troops not to underestimate human morale. They say humans become more dangerous when cornered, not less. Ji-Hai looked at Tae-Wan. They've fought us in what? Maybe a dozen engagements? And they're already this scared? It appears so, Tae-Wan confirmed. He called up a tactical map. These protocols are being distributed to all Rothak forces in 3 sectors. They are adjusting their entire military doctrine to account for human behavior. Good, Ji-Hai said simply. Let them be scared. Fear is a weapon, and right now, it's working for us. Tae-Wan studied her face. You are not surprised by this? No, she admitted. We learned something during our world wars that most species never had to learn. How to be absolutely terrifying when we need to be. The Rothak thought they were the scary ones. They thought their size and their aggression would intimidate everyone. But they've never faced something like us. What makes humans so frightening? Tae-Wan asked. You are smaller than Rothak. Your bodies are more fragile. By every logical measure, they should be superior warriors. Ji-Hai walked to the window, looking out at the base where human and Velkari soldiers were preparing for the next deployment. You want to know what makes us scary? It's not our strength or our weapons. It's that we understand fear intimately. We've spent our entire history making each other afraid. We know exactly how to get into an enemy's head. We know how to make them doubt themselves. We know how to make them break. She turned back to Tae-Wan. The Rothak fight for conquest and glory. Your people fight for logical, strategic objectives. But humans? We fight for each other. We fight because we've seen what happens when we don't, and we'll use every psychological trick, every brutal tactic, every nightmare weapon we've ever invented, because we've already used them all on ourselves. There's nothing the Rothak can do to us that we haven't already done to each other. Tae-Wan felt something he rarely experienced, a genuine emotional reaction that he couldn't suppress. Was it respect? Fear? Awe? Perhaps all 3. I begin to understand, he said slowly. You are not fearless, you are afraid, but you fight anyway. Now you're getting it, Ji-Hai said. Courage isn't about not being scared, it's about being terrified and doing it anyway. That's what the Rothak don't understand. They think their size and strength make them scary. But there's nothing scarier than an enemy who's already afraid and fights anyway. There's nothing more dangerous than someone who's been through hell and come out the other side. A new message came through on Tae-Wan's tablet. Orders from Coalition Command. The Joint Task Force was being redeployed to Garrison Station Theta, a critical supply hub that intelligence suggested would be the Rothak's next major target. We ship out in 6 hours, Tae-Wan announced. This will be a larger battle than Korvax 9. My Marines will be ready, Ji-Hai said. Will your Velkari soldiers be ready to fight beside death chanters and void-born demons? Tae-Wan looked at her for a long moment, then did something very un-Velkari. He smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible on his crystalline features, but it was there. I believe they will welcome the opportunity, he said. Garrison Station Theta hung in space like a steel fortress, but Tae-Wan knew fortresses could fall. The Rothak fleet had arrived 3 days ago, and since then the siege had been relentless. Wave after wave of enemy forces crashed against the station's defenses, and slowly, inevitably, those defenses were weakening. Tae-Wan stood in the command center, watching tactical displays that showed red markers everywhere. Red meant enemy contact. Red meant fighting. Red meant dying. The station's original garrison of 2,000 defenders had been reduced to 1,500. The Joint Task Force had brought the numbers back up, but it wasn't enough. Southern Sector reports critical ammunition shortage, Velthara announced. Western Sector has fallen back to the second defensive line. Eastern Sector is requesting immediate reinforcement. Send 3rd Platoon to the east, Tae-Wan ordered. Redistribute ammunition from Supply Depot 7 to the south. He had been making these decisions for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of constant battle with almost no rest. The Velkari were trained for this, but even they had limits. Tae-Wan could see it in his soldiers' faces. The exhaustion, the wear on their logical minds as they tried to process the endless carnage. Commander, Velthara said quietly, approaching him. I must report that several Velkari soldiers have requested rotation off the front lines. They cite mental exhaustion and decreased combat effectiveness. Tae-Wan nodded. It was logical. Tired soldiers made mistakes. Approved. Rotate them to support positions and replace them with reserves. Commander Taewon, Jihai's voice came through his communicator. We need to talk. He found her in the southern sector command post. She looked as tired as he felt, with dark circles under her eyes and new scars on her armor that she hadn't bothered to repair. But her eyes were still sharp, still alert. What do you need, Captain? Taewon asked. I need you to understand something, Jihai said. My Marines have been offered rotation off the line. Every single one of them refused. Taewon was confused. Why? They are as exhausted as my Velkari soldiers. Perhaps more so given your species' physical limitations. That's exactly my point, Jihai said. We are exhausted. We are hurt. We are scared. But we're not leaving. Do you know why? I confess I do not. Because if we leave, someone else has to take our place, Jihai explained. Someone else has to stand in this hell. And we're not okay with that. So we stay, we keep fighting. We get more tired, more hurt, more scared. And somehow that makes us more dangerous, not less. Taewon started to respond, but an alarm cut him off. The eastern sector was being overrun. He pulled up the tactical display and saw disaster unfolding in real time. A Rothak shock force had broken through the defensive line. They were heading straight for the command center. Straight for where Taewon and Jihai stood. All units, we are being breached, Taewon announced over the communications system. His voice remained calm, even though his mind was calculating survival probabilities. They were very low. Command center will be compromised in approximately 4 minutes. All essential personnel evacuate to... Negative, Jihai cut him off. 4th Marine Squad converge on command center. We're not giving up this position. Captain, the logical choice is to fall back and establish a new command position, Taewon argued. The logical choice is going to get us killed, Jihai shot back. She was already running toward the eastern corridor, shouting into her communicator. Jae-sung Bora, get your squads here now. We've got a breach to seal. Taewon wanted to order her to stop, but there was no time. The Rothak were coming. He could hear weapons fire echoing through the station's corridors, getting closer. He grabbed his own weapon and moved to a defensive position. If the humans were going to make an illogical last stand, he would stand with them. The first Rothak soldier burst through the eastern corridor entrance. It was massive, nearly twice the size of a human, with thick armor plates and a weapon that could punch through steel. Behind it came more, a shock force of 30 elite Rothak warriors. Then the humans arrived. Sergeant Jae-sung came from one side corridor with his squad. Private Bora emerged from another with hers. They didn't have time to form proper defensive positions. They didn't have superior numbers or better weapons. What they had was fury. Taewon watched something he would never forget. The humans didn't just fight, they transformed. They screamed as they attacked, war cries that echoed through the corridors. They moved with a coordination that seemed impossible given the chaos, each Marine covering the others, advancing and retreating in a deadly dance. Bora threw herself at a Rothak warrior, using her body weight to knock it off balance while Jae-sung fired at point-blank range. Another Marine, barely out of his teens, lost his weapon, but grabbed a piece of broken debris and used it like a club, striking a Rothak soldier again and again, even as it tried to shake him off. The humans used tactics that seemed pulled from nightmares. They targeted weak points with brutal efficiency. They used the environment, collapsing part of the ceiling onto Rothak soldiers. They fought dirty, fighting mean, fighting like every battle was personal. And the Rothak began to break. These were supposed to be elite shock troops, trained for the hardest combat. But Taewon saw fear in their eyes, real, genuine fear. They started to hesitate, to fall back, to look for escape routes instead of pressing their advantage. Push forward, Jihai shouted. Don't let them regroup. The humans advanced and the Rothak retreated. Not in an organized withdrawal, but in a rout. They fled back through the eastern corridor, leaving their dead and wounded behind. When the corridor was clear, Taewon stood among the carnage, trying to understand what he had just witnessed. The humans had been outnumbered and outgunned. Logic said they should have lost, but they had won because they had something the Rothak didn't. They had become something terrifying. Command center is secure, Jihai reported, her voice ragged from shouting. All units, the breach has been sealed. Taewon found her sitting against a wall, her hands shaking. Blood covered her armor, though he couldn't tell if it was hers or from the enemy. For the first time, he saw the cost of what humans did in battle. They didn't just fight. They became what was necessary to win, and it hurt them. Why? He asked her. Why do you push yourselves this way? Ji-hai looked up at him with exhausted eyes. Because someone has to. Because if we don't, the Rothak take this station. If they take this station, they cut off supply lines to 3 sectors. If those sectors fall, millions of people die. So we don't get to be tired. We don't get to be scared. We have to be what's needed, even if it's terrible. But you are scared, Taewon observed. I can see it. You are terrified. Of course I am, Ji-hai said. Only an idiot wouldn't be scared in a situation like this. But here's what we learned a long time ago. Fear is just information. It tells you what the stakes are. It doesn't tell you what to do. That's still your choice. Over the next days, the siege continued. But something had changed. The Rothak attacks became less aggressive, more cautious. Intercepted communications showed that the shock forces' retreat had shaken their confidence. Reports were spreading through Rothak ranks about the death chanters who refused to break, who became more dangerous when they should have been defeated. Taewon also noticed changes in his Velkari soldiers. Those who had fought alongside the humans began to adopt some of their attitudes. They stopped requesting rotations. They pushed themselves harder. They started to trust that if the humans could keep fighting, so could they. On the 21st day of the siege, coalition reinforcements arrived. The Rothak, seeing their window of opportunity closing, launched one final massive assault. Every defender on the station was called to the front lines. Taewon fought shoulder to shoulder with Bora in the western sector. She was young, barely 20 years old, but she fought like a veteran. When a Rothak commander tried to kill Taewon, Bora threw herself in front of the blast. The energy weapon hit her square in the chest and she went down. Taewon caught her as she fell. Her armor was destroyed and he could see the terrible wound beneath. She should have been dead, but her eyes were still open, still aware. Don't let them make you afraid. Commander, she whispered, blood on her lips. That's the only way. They win. Something broke inside Taewon. Something that had been held in place by logic and reason and Velkari training. He felt rage, pure emotional, illogical rage. He had watched this young human sacrifice herself for him, just as Da-un had sacrificed herself for her squad weeks ago. He understood now. He finally understood what made humans so dangerous. Taewon stood up, still holding Bora's body, and he screamed. It was a sound no Velkari had made in thousands of years, a war cry full of fury and pain and determination. He charged the Rothak commander with a ferocity that surprised even himself, fighting not with calculated precision, but with raw emotion. The Rothak commander fell, and seeing their leader defeated by the supposedly logical Velkari, seeing him fight like the humans fought, the remaining Rothak troops broke completely. The medical bay was full of wounded soldiers. Humans and Velkari lay side by side, being treated by medics who no longer saw species, only patients who needed help. Taewon walked through slowly, his crystalline skin still marked with the scars of battle. Bora had survived. The medics said it was a miracle, though Taewon suspected it was more about human stubbornness than divine intervention. She was in recovery, unconscious, but stable. He had visited her twice already, though he didn't know why. The Velkari didn't usually form attachments to individual soldiers, but Bora had saved his life, and her last words kept echoing in his mind. Don't let them make you afraid. Coalition Command had sent new orders. Intelligence had located the Rothak staging ground for their next major offensive, a massive military installation in a neutral zone. It was where they gathered their forces, planned their attacks, and stored their supplies. If it could be destroyed, the entire Rothak invasion strategy would collapse. There was only one problem. The mission was nearly impossible. The installation held over 5,000 Rothak soldiers and was protected by defensive systems designed to stop full fleet assaults. Any attack would be suicide. Coalition Command was calling for volunteers. The briefing room was packed. Taewon stood at the front with Ji-hee, looking at the tactical display. The Rothak installation glowed red on the hologram, surrounded by hostile markers in every direction. The probability of mission success is less than 30%, Taewon announced to the assembled troops. The probability of survival for any individual soldier is even lower. Under normal circumstances, I would never recommend this operation. However, these are not normal circumstances. The Rothak are preparing for another major offensive, Jihai continued. If we don't stop them here, they'll launch attacks on 5 different colonies simultaneously. Millions of civilians will be in danger. So yes, this mission is risky. Yes, many of us probably won't come back. But we're the only ones who can stop this. She paused, looking around the room at the mix of human and Velkari faces. Command is asking for volunteers. No one will think less of you if you choose not to go. This is above and beyond any reasonable expectation. Taiwan expected maybe half the force to volunteer. That would be enough to mount an operation. What happened next shocked him to his core. Every single soldier stood up, human and Velkari alike. Even wounded soldiers who could barely walk pushed themselves to their feet. The entire task force volunteered. We fight together, Sergeant Jae-sung said simply. That's what we do now. Velthara, who had always been the most logical of Taiwan's officers, nodded in agreement. The humans have taught us something, Commander. Sometimes the logical choice is to do the illogical thing. Sometimes you have to fight even when the numbers say you should not. Taiwan felt something he had never experienced in his entire military career. Pride mixed with fear. He was proud of these soldiers and he was afraid of losing them. It was a very human emotion. Very well, he said, his voice rougher than usual. We launch the assault in 24 hours. Prepare yourselves. That night, Taiwan couldn't sleep again. He found himself at the observation deck staring out at the stars. Jihee found him there as he somehow knew she would. Having second thoughts? She asked, standing beside him. I am calculating the casualties we will take, Taiwan admitted. Even if we succeed, we will lose many soldiers. Good soldiers. Friends. Yeah, Jihai said quietly. We will. But you know what? They volunteered anyway. They know the risks, and they're going anyway. That's what makes them heroes. I don't want them to be heroes, Taiwan said. I want them to survive. I know, Jihai replied. But that's war. You don't get to choose who survives. You only get to choose what you fight for. The humans have changed me, Taiwan said. I used to believe that emotion was weakness, that logic alone could solve any problem. But you've shown me that sometimes emotion is strength. Sometimes you need to feel to truly fight. We didn't change you, Jihai corrected. We just reminded you of something your species forgot. Every living thing feels fear. Every living thing fights for survival. Your people just got so good at logic that you forgot the other tools you had. The assault began 30 hours later. The Joint Task Force approached the Rothak installation in stealth ships, running dark to avoid detection. They wouldn't stay hidden for long, but they didn't need long. They just needed to get close. The plan was simple, which was good because complicated plans rarely survived contact with the enemy. They would hit the installation from 3 sides simultaneously, creating chaos and confusion. Then, while the Rothak scrambled to respond, a small team would infiltrate the command center and plant explosives powerful enough to destroy the entire facility. Taiwan would lead the Velkari forces on the eastern assault. Jihee would command the western attack. And young Private So Young, who had proven herself clever and resourceful, would lead the infiltration team. The attack began with explosions. Human Marines launched the first strike, hitting the installation's outer defenses with everything they had. The Rothak responded immediately, but here's what Taiwan had learned about humans. They were excellent at psychological warfare. The humans broadcast war cries over all frequencies. They used captured Rothak communication codes to send false orders, creating confusion in the enemy ranks. They made their attacks seem unpredictable, hitting from unexpected angles, retreating suddenly only to attack from a new direction. Most importantly, they made the Rothak afraid. So Young's infiltration team moved through the chaos like ghosts. They had studied Rothak psychology, learning what scared them, and they used every trick they knew. They left signs of their presence, bloodstains, damaged equipment, whispered sounds over speakers, making the Rothak soldiers paranoid and jumpy. The Rothak command center received reports of human soldiers everywhere, even in places where no humans had actually gone. The fear spread like a virus through their ranks. Taewon watched it all unfold from his command position, fighting his own battle while monitoring the larger operation. He saw Rothak units refusing to advance, requesting backup for threats that didn't exist, falling back from positions they should have held. The humans had gotten into their heads, and now the Rothak were defeating themselves. Commander, infiltration. Team has reached the command center, So Young reported over the radio. Setting charges now. Acknowledged, Taewon replied. All units prepare for extraction. We have 10 minutes. But then things went wrong. A Rothak commander, braver or more desperate than the others, led a counterattack directly at Jihai's position. The Western assault force was suddenly surrounded and cut off. Taewon, we're pinned down. Jihai's voice came through, surprisingly calm despite the weapons fire audible in the background. We can't reach the extraction point. All Eastern forces converge on the Western assault position, Taewon ordered immediately. We leave no one behind. It was an illogical choice. It put more soldiers at risk. It jeopardized the entire mission. But it was the right choice, and Taewon knew it in a way that went beyond logic. These were his soldiers, his friends, and humans had taught him that you didn't abandon your friends. The Velkari forces crashed into the Rothak counterattack with devastating precision, but they fought with something new, the emotional fury that the humans had shown them. They screamed as they charged. They pushed themselves beyond physical limits. They fought not as logical machines but as living beings protecting what mattered to them. The Rothak line broke. Western forces are clear, Jihai reported. All units fall back to extraction. They ran through the installation as explosives counted down. Human and Velkari soldiers covered each other, helping wounded comrades, refusing to leave anyone behind. The installation began to shake as the first charges detonated deep in its structure. They reached the extraction ships with seconds to spare. As the ships pulled away, Taewon watched the installation explode in a massive fireball that lit up space like a new sun. 5,000 Rothak soldiers gone in an instant. The staging ground destroyed. The invasion stopped, but the cost had been high. They had lost 63 soldiers in the assault, 63 names to add to the memorial, 63 families who would receive the news that their loved ones weren't coming home. In the aftermath, coalition intelligence reported something remarkable. Rothak forces across multiple sectors were refusing to engage. Some units were deserting. Others were requesting transfers away from human combat zones. The psychological impact of the assault, combined with months of fighting humans, had broken something fundamental in the Rothak military spirit. They had learned what Taewon had learned, that humans were terrifying not because of their physical strength or their technology, but because they understood fear and refused to let it control them. 2 weeks later, Taewon stood at another memorial. Bora, now recovered, stood beside him. Ji-hee was there too, along with Jae-sung, So-young, Hyun-woo, and dozens of other soldiers who had survived the campaign. They died fighting for something they believed in, Ji-hee said, looking at the names carved into the memorial wall. Human and Velkari names mixed together. That's the best any of us can hope for. I have been thinking about fear, Taewon said. Before I fought beside humans,